Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast, a community of amazing people who love the building of games and the development of games. And, an incredible group of people. I'm Oscar Clark. I'm your host for today, he, him pronouns, and we're on a Podquest to discover everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And I am delighted today to be joined by an amazing designer. Ioana, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ioana, she, her. Um, my main thing, well, I'm a games designer. I've been a games designer for 7 years, professionally, longer than that. Hobbyist. Um, I
We've
am.
all been there.
I know, right?
It's a calling. It's a calling.
It is, and it's something that you just keep coming back to. My main thing is social games design, so I've been working in social games on different platforms, but it's not just social games as people think of. So like Facebook games is games that are meant to be played socially, and that's kind of like my bread and butter. That's kind of the main thing that I do. But I'm just a generalist game designer, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I think for people's context, I mean, so obviously when we think about social games, a lot of people will think about obviously the one end of the spectrum. You've got the MMO kind of thing where we're going in and we're doing our kind of our big jaunt together, our big adventure together. Other
Hmm.
scales, you've got the old school kind of like I will like the old Facebook era. We'll probably get into this later. The Facebook era where we sold
Yeah.
our friends for resources,
Mm. For sure.
essentially. But then, what I think, I mean, obviously, any kind of game, I mean, the social factor of any game is really important, and we'll get into that too. But
Mm.
what you guys at Mojiworks are doing, what Matthew and his team are doing, specifically around the use of social platforms like Snap. And I think that what's the kind of quintessential thing that differentiates a kind of a game that is essentially tied directly into that communication experience.
So it's an interesting question because I think it evolved with the different platforms. So currently we're working with Discord and they are our main platform.
Yeah, yeah,
But we have worked with all of them throughout time. We have worked
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah.
Facebook, with iMessage, with Snapchat, with
I'm
uh,
biased to ask you about Snap because the guys that made the game tech for that Snap bought used to work with us on PlayStation Home back in the day. So
yeah,
Dave and those guys just are incredible, incredibly clever.
very talented
Yeah,
team for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
I think the thing that is interesting to me, or the thing that keeps attracting all of us as a team to it, is that
yeah,
you are in these platforms talking to people already.
yeah.
You are on Snap, you are on Discord, you are whatever you are. You're
Well,
already
you're there
there
to talk, aren't you?
to talk, right?
Mm.
But what we found is that you're not really there to talk, you're there to make experiences.
Yeah,
So, whatever establishes that experience and that connection between people and forming memories is like hanging out, right? Basically. And the good thing about the games that we have now is that they have really come a long way. Sometimes I forget, because I do this every day, I forget that people don't really know what these games look like. They are
mm.
synchronous multiplayer. We do synchronous multiplayer. You can like it's exactly as any multiplayer game would be. You drop in, you don't have to download anything. You can play it on your phone, you can play it on your computer. Everyone sees the same game world. It's completely synchronized. It's like
And of
any
course,
other
that's
multiplayer
easy. I
game.
mean,
Yeah.
technically, nothing can go wrong with that.
Well,
Magic, technical
yeah.
magic. Someone does that for us.
So,
Yeah,
someone does. Yeah. It's but that's what I mean. Like it's not. I think if you think about, and we can talk about it later. If you think about that sort of like lockstep, like come back, notification play, it's not that that's not good because that is good, and I can talk about that later because it's like additional. But now you can be social in every single way. You can send your friends messages, you can have notification, you can be like in world at the same time and like play together. It's actually quite impressive, I think.
yeah. And so I think talking about designing games meant for sharing, obviously great title for a book. I think let's sort of dive into that because I think one of the things I find fascinating is as mammals, we have been playful
Mm.
forever.
Yeah.
It's millions of years of play exists in various forms, and there are various arguments about what the function of play is, but generally it's about establishing a combination of like skills and social patterns. You could argue. I mean,
Yeah.
we could debate that probably in an entire podcast, but I kind of want to sort of, if you think about the flow of that, we
Mm.
then created computer games where that wasn't an option particularly,
Yeah.
or it was a less of an option. The closest we get, back in the earliest days, is an arcade machine sat in a fish and chip shop. This is back to my memories here, playing Space Invaders with my mates, and we were arguing who was on next, and
Yeah.
that was the social factor.
Mm.
Uh, could I put my mate off by nudging him and therefore get on quicker? And I kind of joke, but I think there's something actually about it. To me, that's part of this idea of like the meta
Mm.
collective part of things. Anyway,
Yeah.
so let's start. Now we have got back to the point where obviously we've had multiplayer for a long time. Meridian
Mm.
59 was 1994, 96. I can't remember. It's basically that was the first 3D online multiplayer experience. We've been playing multiplayer games from. In fact, actually, I'm going to go even further back. 1984. I was playing Shades. Shades was a text-based multiplayer MUD, a multi-user
Mm.
dungeon.
Yeah.
Actually, I was playing MUD as well, but that was like actually, or ironically, I played MUD after and ended up working a little bit with Richard Bartle,
Oh,
very
that's
very little
exciting.
bit. Don't Nobody wants to hear my stories, but I was very lucky. I got to do a little bit of work with Richard Bartle, who's a delightful person, and some of the stuff that we learn, that as an industry we have learned from that era of the very earliest interactions based on text alone
Yeah.
often still apply.
Mm.
So when I'm looking through your kind of like table of contents in the book, one of the elements that you highlight there, which I think is really interesting, is the social contract. Could you kind of like go into what that is and what that means?
Yeah, of course. So, the way that I see it, social contract is not a new term or a term specifically in games, but the way that I would most easily describe it is, it's an obligation, right? It's a decision between two people, a tacit decision. So it's not something that we write anywhere. That if you do something, I'll do something in return, or like I will uphold whatever your expectation it would be.
Mm,
So an easy example of this is something like, if your friends and yourself, you decide to go somewhere at a certain time, your obligation is that you will be there on time. With games, it's a little bit more complicated than this because the game itself offers you opportunities to have more elements to this social contract. So not only do you decide to like play with them, and that is something that you establish, like, oh, you and I, we play, say every now and again we play like League of Legends or something, whatever the game
mm,
might be. But also when you are inside the game, there are roles and there are rules, and you promise basically your friends that you will do the roles that you are being assigned by the game. So if you're the healer,
Leroy Jenkins.
exactly. um
Sorry,
Now
sorry.
obviously
Apologies.
though,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that you it doesn't mean that you're
we
always
should probably
adhering to
explain
it.
in case there's any human being on the planet that doesn't know that
Oh,
old,
I
old,
gotta.
old meme. That's just a moment in I think it's World of Warcraft where
Yes.
was captured on film of an idiot basically just charging ahead and
Yep.
destroying all the plans, and it's hilarious and it's well worth seeing. I
Yeah.
say idiot, but probably they've gone down as legendary. So anyway, what can I say?
But actually a very good example of something that can happen. So the thing with the social contract, as for us as the makers of social games, right? The thing is not so much that everyone has to be in line, is that there is opportunity for you to establish something.
What
So
the
if
line should be
what the
or
line should
could
be.
be? Yeah.
Exactly. So if I, for example, tell you we should band together and I'm the tank and you're the whatever, and someone is planning all this stuff up and someone is going straight ahead, that is still a social moment. we wouldn't have had
Absolutely.
that moment if there wasn't any contract to uphold. The thing is that you're trying to encourage the rules to be set in place so that the game experience is a joint one rather than a disconnected one,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
pretty
I
much.
think this is really interesting because I'm a fan of particularly an Asian developer team kind of trend that happened a few years back, which I call the Wanderer. Well, it was called a Wanderer historically by a
Mm,
number of games. Different games had different terms for it, but the Wanderer was somebody who was online at the same time as you, and your
mm,
only social interaction with them was that they were there, and one of their abilities you got to temporarily use.
mm,
And sometimes you could go further and they could become allies, but you generally couldn't talk to them. But
mm,
it meant that if they turned up again at the same time as you and you saw them again, you recognized them, and actually you were actively told this is the second time you've been traded, whatever.
mm.
And to me, this is really interesting because the scope of what a social contract can be very game related. It can be very, very tiny interactions. It
Yeah.
can be very deep interactions. And I think that to me is fascinating about we can be playful with what the social contract means in a game experience.
Yeah, I think so. And that's the thing is the one of the things that I try to get across in the book mostly is that it's the putting this structure in place does not mean forcing the player to keep to the structure, is giving them the tools to try to do all of these things,
Mm.
right? To try to have these different degrees of connection as well
Yeah,
with different people. Like some people don't even want to have that sort of connection, or some people don't have the time to have that sort of connection. That doesn't mean that they're not, if you can't be online at the same time in the most hardcore sort of playing ranked matches or whatever you are, there shouldn't be like it's either that or nothing. There should be a
yeah,
gradual sort of, oh, maybe I do play like a little bit with this friend and we talk over voice or we don't talk. And like that's also another whole thing of, are you talking in another setting, are you not talking, are you in the same room, are you
yeah.
talking through text, because that always changes. And all of
Always.
these different minutia and
Mm,
factors, they create like such a rich experience. And I think one
mm.
of the mistakes that happens a lot with games that are multiplayer, but I try to make that distinction. There's a lot of games that are multiplayer but they're not necessarily very social,
Yeah.
is that they forget that the point of other people is not so that they get more intelligent AI, right?
No,
Because
absolutely. And
AI can be made intelligent, right? That's not a
yeah,
problem we have anymore.
no,
Is the
literally. Well,
social
yeah.
component you can't.
Exactly, it's hard to fake. It's hard to fake that, I mean, I'll give you to your point. I'm a lover of first-person shooters. I love them. I am terrible at them.
Yeah,
I have dyspraxia. I'm old. I have no chance. So, it's quite often I'll go into a game and it's headshot dead, headshot dead, headshot dead. There is multiplayer, exactly to your point, but no social value.
yeah.
Now, I am intrigued, although I'm a bit daunted by the Helldivers environment, because there seems to be something about what they're trying to do there, which seems to be kind of making it more about the party.
Mm.
And I don't know if those games are actually. I mean, they're huge numbers and hugely successful. I'm hoping now. But from your point of view, are you seeing that acknowledgement of the need of the social connection?
I do think so. And I think predominantly it's because it's because of the people playing them as well.
Yeah,
Um but I do also think we have learned. Don't get me wrong, we have learned from making all of these things. And it actually, one of the games that I look at probably more is something like Fortnite,
yeah,
because if you think about it, it's not so much the gameplay of Fortnite that is interesting to me, although that's perfectly serviceable, right?
yeah,
It's all of the other stuff, right?
mm,
Like all
mm,
of these, oh, they're doing like collaboration and all of these people, and there's concerts and there's all
yeah.
sorts of stuff happening. it's
Doing
it's a
homework.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, come on, doing homework. Yeah,
exactly, it's
yeah,
insane, right? So that, but that's actually kind of a thing. um But I think my point is that I think a lot of people look at that and they feel like daunted that to have social, it has to be like, first of all, it has to be of very huge proportions, which I
Yeah.
don't think this is true, because some of my fondest memories of playing social games are board games.
Oh, we're going to get into that.
Yeah, so but also I think in general, I think people just treat it as like, oh, I can't do it because it's a very involved, very expensive thing, which it doesn't have to be. And another one is, I think more traditionally, as game designers, we forget that this is like an element. And obviously I come at it from a completely different point of view, because I've been doing social games for so long
Mm,
that to me, I almost kind of come at the game from the opposite direction. So I do all of the regular stuff, like, oh,
mm.
this weapon should feel good when you hit
Yeah,
someone with it. But in principle, that is not the hardest part of my job.
yeah,
Plenty of people have made a weapon feel good. Plenty of people have made like levels and stuff like that. That is the stuff that can be replicated.
yeah.
Is the other stuff that I think people need to just keep
I
observing
completely
and
agree.
learning
And
from.
in order to do that, let's because I want to come into this whole like this there's board games elements there. There's a when you're watching other people play.
Mm,
I'm a particular bias on that because I've just launched a real play thing, which I'll probably mention later. But let's talk about identity, and I think
mm,
particularly what I'm fascinated by in the book you're trying to cover that the identity isn't just one thing. There's a scale. There's a kind of like onion layers of it. So, what
yeah,
is kind of the difference between like, and I particularly am a massive, I'm a massive fan of thinking about social identity.
yeah.
So for you, what does identity mean?
So, well, I will sort of tell you what I've read about in like social science papers and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and that went into the book, because the
Mm.
thing that I've looked at was this idea that you value your adherence to the group more than you value the way that the group makes you look, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And they were talking about um, there was a very specific example, but an easier example is people calling themselves gamers, right? That's a
Mm.
simple, great example, right? There is a combination. What does it mean when you call yourself a gamer in the zeitgeist of society?
Mm.
Because everyone would think of a different thing. Like people that are gamers, they would be like, oh, that's like a homie of mine, right?
Yeah.
People who maybe have children, they're like, oh, games are like toxic and addictive and whatever. And yeah.
Sadly, that's
Um,
what people think. Yeah, yeah. It's
yeah,
not true, but
like,
well, it's not inherently true.
no, I mean, but that's what I mean. Like, everyone has an opinion about it,
Yeah,
be it positive or negative. Everyone has an opinion about it.
yeah,
And when you accept that, like, adherence to the group, you have to accept the whole of it.
yeah,
Because you can't pick and choose. I mean, you know who you are privately as a person. Saying you're like, you're not gonna love all of the games that you play. If you say you're a gamer, that doesn't mean that you love all the games in the world. You have your preferences and you have all of these other things.
absolutely.
But identity is, apart from the fact that it's basically, it has these sides of like, there is who we are, there is who we perceive ourselves to be,
Yeah.
and then who others perceive us to be,
Mm.
and then who we want to be in the context of a group, and then who the group then thinks we are in that context. Like, it
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
it keeps on going on top of each other, because it's all about
yeah.
perspective. And I mean, you know it's it's fascinating to look at, for example, social media, right?
Yeah.
Social media is a masterclass in what identity really is, and if you
Mm.
look at it, it's super interesting, because who is the person, right? Me, I know who I am, I know all of these details about myself. I can choose to enhance or hide certain parts of myself in order to appear a certain way on social media. Now, that view that I created then gets interpreted by every single person that ever looks
Yeah,
at my profile. And based on it, whether or not they know me in real life and how much they know me in real life, they extrapolate a different
yeah,
thing from my online persona. And it's the
absolutely.
same with games as well. So,
No, completely. And I mean, so one of the things I found fascinating is I like to think about it in this kind of lens of tribalism.
mm,
So, I think about it in national terms. So, for example, you could be British,
mm,
although it's an interesting one, British, because I think of myself as British, but I don't feel particularly like I'm not the kind of classical patriotic type. I'm very happy I'm British. I have no issue with that. I'm not trying to sort of say anything funny about it, but I'm not a flag waving kind of like yeah. I see us for our benefits and our flaws. Um, I think of myself more as an internationalist. But what does that mean? Again, I'm choosing identities that I want to aspire to be. But then, if you think about it as well, I'm also English. So am I an Englander? Am I going to be sat there with the Red Cross flag and white background? Well, again, this is difficult because when you then subdivide even further. So I have that. I think um, maybe it's a particularly of my generation, but I have history of remembering as a kid growing up and seeing poor behaviour by people carrying that flag, particularly to diverse communities, and so I feel a little bit uncomfortable
mm,
around England flags as a direct result of that. So again, I think it's really interesting. I mean, by the way, there's no shadow cast anyone who is patriotic. Feel free. I'm not trying to kill your buzz. Um, my point is more thinking about layers. You can like
mm,
football or
yeah.
not. If you like football, is that good enough? No, you got to support a team. So obviously Liverpool. Don't ask me why. It's all to do with going to the Isle of Man on a regular basis. I have no grounds other than that. But then I'm not a massive football fan, so I don't. I will default to Liverpool, but other people will say I'm a splitter because I'm not someone who's going to go there and watch matches and stuff like that. It's not. I'm very happy if it's on.
mm,
I'd be very happy if I happened to be in the area and watch a match. Fine, but I'm not going to seek it out. It's not my cup of tea. So what does that cluster mean to me is different from what it means to mates of mine who are absolute rabid fans of whatever their team is.
yeah.
In fact, you end up finding that there's so many layers of specialization,
Mm,
and each layer you're at, I think there's a level of conflict with the
yeah.
them. And I think
Mm,
that's the crux of it is that we're trying to constantly define the us,
mm,
but we couldn't define the us without defining the them. Is that fair?
yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I have a very similar example actually in the
Mm.
book talking about like Dark Souls fans,
Yeah.
because I find that to be fascinating, right? And
Mm.
like how hardcore you have to be to call
Yeah.
yourself a fan of something,
Yeah.
because and who's the authority? Because if you are
Yeah.
to look at something like, oh, you're like in the charter of, I don't know, whatever, there's an authority that determines whether or not you are a good, you know, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But if it's something like this, which is, first of all, it's not it's about like playing video games, which is like a recreational activity,
Mm.
um but also like who's gonna say? Usually in smaller groups, this is actually kind of interesting, in smaller groups there tends to be like a dominating personality,
Yeah.
or there is consensus. So there's two ways. There's either consensus or there's like someone louder, basically. And what happens in yeah, what happens in
Normally me.
big communities is that groups become a person. So instead of having a louder personality, you have a louder group of personalities. um and it's quite interesting because I think at the end of the day, it is the group. If it was some authority that would determine whether or not someone is allowed to be part of a group, then there is an understanding that that can happen.
Yeah.
If it's a fandom, that is not the case. So the only person who can tell whether or not you are that thing is yourself.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think, but this is I think the kind of the juxtaposition is it. So when we're trying to design, we have to think not only do we have zero control over what the community do,
Mm.
but we're essentially handing our child over to them to form their identity in nature. So
Yeah.
it's a kind of a it's an interesting thing because you kind of got to be able to craft these structures
Mm.
that encourage community engagement, but
Yeah.
knowing the actual dynamics are going to come down to the audience that we've attracted. I
Mm.
think we can still influence. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. I think there's lots of ways we can influence that, and designing out toxicity from a game experience is really interesting, challenge and very possible.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things I found really fascinating, even I talk about this particular mod a lot because it's still my favorite mod of all time, a mod called Weapon of Choice, by a guy called Mark Smith, who ended up working at NVIDIA. I actually ended up working with him. Lovely chap, absolutely great. Weapon of Choice was the mod where you'd shoot your opponent, and but kill them, and then basically when they respawn, you can't use the rocket launcher again until they kill you. And if you kill them again, you can't use the lightning gun. Then you go down, so basically down to axes. So people who are really good are running around chasing people who are not very good, newbies or whatever, who have rocket launchers. Now, obviously, in the end, the really skilled people still win, but the people who aren't feel they've got a fighting chance. And what that did from a social design point of view is it meant that skilled players could have fun with their mates who are newbies.
Mm.
It meant it was much more pleasant as an
Mm.
experience. And I understand from a bunch of folks who worked on like Call of Duty and various other things that there are a couple of modes like that were implemented, and apparently they didn't even know about this mod, which is I think fascinating. But I find it's interesting how as designers, we don't see more of these attempts to think about
Mm.
how we can engage more people together with different skill sets. And instead, we seem to focus on the ever specialization of your social identity. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, it does. I think this is kind of interesting to me for sort of similar but sort of different reason.
Hmm.
Uh, because I think there is something about the gamer identity that implies you have to be good at it.
Hmm.
And even when you aren't, I think there is shame involved with that you are supposed to be good. You are supposed to be good at playing video games. You are supposed to be able to do it. And if you're not good, you're supposed to be able to get good. Um
Yeah.
no pun, but
Yeah.
maybe a pun intended, right? Um
Well, that's the classic line, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. But this is something that we see a lot because given the kind of games that we do, we out the gate, we already have, and we know we have people that have a wide range of skill, a really wide range of skill. And one of the things that we design for purposefully is people being able to have fun even when they have that varying level
Yeah.
of skill.
Yeah.
Because it is more important for us that they spend time with their friend than it is that that person gets like better at like twitchy
Absolutely.
movements and stuff like that. And
Absolutely.
that can be as far as like choosing a mechanic that will allow them to be more involved. So, for example, you have different weapons that are just easier to use, which a lot of people would go really wild about because that's. But that is for us is more important that someone that doesn't know how to play the game
Yeah.
um can still like engage in a
But
way that
golf,
doesn't make you
yeah.
feel bad.
You think about a game like golf, okay, sport game, whatever you want to call it. Um, I, I, I'm with Mark Twain. It's a good walk spoiled. I think it's Mark Twain who said that. But they thought about this.
Yeah,
That's why they have a handicap,
yeah,
so that you could play with anybody. Well, almost anybody. I think that we don't see enough of that personally.
yeah.
In fact, I would even go further. My favorite idea is that you monetize choosing to be worse. You're choosing worse setup, choosing more difficulty. So my favorite idea is imagine you could get a Call of Duty like game, and the central thing is that you've got effectively a loincloth, you've got a giant green luminous arrow pointing at you in the sky wherever you are, and you have a wooden stick.
Nice.
Now, in order to get that, you take that you object, you hold that. If you hold it for a minute and you're still alive, you get to buy it for $1,000. Now, again, I'm not serious. I'm just like, this is a hypothetical.
Mm.
Now, imagine this: a guy turns up on your server with that outfit. How scared are you
Yeah,
if
for
you're going
sure.
up against someone that good that they can last a minute against some of the best players, and they're on your server?
Yeah.
What I mean, just think about the prestige. And obviously, there's so much that goes around that in terms of like, what are the rewards, what's the benefits, what's in it for them, what are the stakes.
Yeah,
These kinds of
exactly.
thinking, I think, so much more interesting than just, oh, you've leveled up, have a better gun.
Yeah, I think so. But I would even go as far as to say that we punish too much. And this is again out of a desire. Certain games are hard, and certain games
Yeah,
should be hard.
that's okay.
Not all games have to be like this, right?
No,
That's
dark
I
Souls.
want to preface that. But if
Yeah,
you're trying to make a game where multiple people are supposed to be having fun, it is better to not do that this way. One of the things that we keep on joking about is how you make things that are unpleasant fun.
yes.
So when you die, was it funny?
Mm,
Because that makes it so much better, right?
absolutely.
If I
Absolutely.
die and I'm so angry that I'm gonna throw my keyboard out the window, that's not gonna be a very good social experience. If
No.
I die and I laugh, then I'm gonna be able to go back in and enjoy myself with my friends. And I think that's one of the things that we try a lot to do. And that's one of the lessons that I derive is like everything that you do, even when I'm not succeeding, I'm still having fun.
Yeah. I mean, I could. One of my favorite talks was a guy, Florian, who was at Wooga at the time. I think it was Wooga. Worked on Jelly Splash. He did a talk in 2014 at GDC about the FU moment. One of my favorite talks. One of the most influential talks on my thinking about level design ever.
Hmm.
And what he was talking about is you want them to love and hate that moment. And yeah, that's the important bit, is that you
Yeah.
want that. Oh my god! And yet
Yeah.
still want to do it again.
Yeah.
And I think that's so. Let's. I mean, obviously, we could spend hours talking about identity and community and blah blah blah. Let's talk about. Um, so what got me into the games industry? What made me want to do is probably D&D.
Yes.
So I started playing D&D when I was 10. My uncle was the referee. When I was 12, I was running games for the family, and I ended up writing a very amateur role-playing game and going around all the UK conventions with board games and role-playing games that I designed. Anyone in that early 90s era will probably have heard me shouting at UK Gen Con that my game was about to start, and we had thousands of people playing games. I'll tell you a little bit about the style of game later, but the point I'm trying to get to here is that there's so much in terms of what makes games work, what interactions work, that for me pivotally comes from my exposure to how to build and also how to play these, complicated game mechanics,
Mm.
very very balanced game mechanics that board games represent and tabletop games represent.
Yeah.
You refer to games as part of the social puzzle, and you talk about physical games like tabletop and board games. What
Yeah.
do you think that brings to the sort of social conundrum?
There's so many things that I think. So there's many things that I don't think we have managed to replicate in video games that
Hmm.
board games have been doing for a very long time, and they partially have. They have the benefit of physicality. This is very interesting to me. They have the little pieces, and just exchanging something in person with someone else
Yeah,
can feel a
flipping the
certain
table.
way. Yeah, I mean, obviously, but I think something that board games do very well, and something that is more relevant to the kind of games that maybe we were doing on Facebook, is this sort of like quite transactional kind of um oh, I'm gonna think for a little bit. And it depends how you play board games, because a lot of people, they go really in on it. But I remember, if you I keep thinking of like playing a board game at Christmas while the Christmas dinner is being made,
Yeah.
and people sort of like returning to it and doing like a little thing, and there is an understanding that we are doing an activity together but it's done over a longer period of time, and there is the all of these like physical pieces that remind us of where we are, and just the experience of it. I think they have a certain staying power that I think video games, also because of platform, just go in and out. If you have a
Yeah.
box for a board game, you can just pull it out. Like we have, I was playing with my partner an Articulate that was bought in the 80s. uh that sort of thing,
Articulate. Wow. Yeah, I think I've got
it's
that up here
falling at the
somewhere.
seams.
I think it's behind my green screen. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so
Oh,
but you
for
have
anyone
it.
who wants to know, I am at risk of death at any point because I have all of the board games I've got from, I mean, I'm joking, obviously, that I've got from Kickstarters and various other things surrounding me. My office is basically like top to tail with board games, about 80% of which I've never got around to playing because getting somebody together to play that game, I mean, I, I had the Brandon Sanderson's Reckoners board game, which probably no one even knows what I'm talking about with that one. Frosthaven's right here. So I'm obsessed with kind of like this kind of principle. So anyway,
Yeah.
you were
I
saying,
just feel so there's a couple of things. First of all, there is I think the social contract there is stronger because it's
yeah,
an activity that you do in
well, it's
person.
framed as well. We're
Yeah,
going to say, so, pause the normal social contract, but it's there, back of our heads. Now
exactly.
we're going to suspend that, and now you can be playful with it.
Yeah,
You can be ruthless. You can be mean. You can backstab. In fact, the more you pervert the standard social contract, the funnier it is.
exactly. And I think this is one of the things that I talk about is how, in a way, like playing role playing games and playing board games, they're kind of an extension of how children sort of play,
Yeah,
because one of the things that children do, right, they play doctor,
yeah,
and they establish like a shared imagination. You're the doctor, I'm the patient. They're playing with what the rules of society are, what they understand and what they have seen like other people and when they're doing
yeah,
this thing. When you grow older, those interactions, they're no longer interesting to you. So what you're looking for is another rule set that you don't know, of another frame
yeah,
that allows you to do the same thing, because that activity, it's pleasurable, it stimulates the mind, it makes you feel like,
yeah,
oh, but if I was this kind of person, if I was a bard
yeah,
in a court in the medieval times, what would I do, how would
yeah.
I behave, what would I talk like?
Well, the reason
um
why this is so poignant for me is because I've just kicked off a podcast with a whole bunch of amazing people where we're recording sessions. Generally, they're about 20 minutes long, as in the play part. And there's a dilemma. So in
mm,
20 minutes' time, something terrible is going to happen, unless, depending on what you decide.
mm,
And we present the folks with a bunch of information, often conflicting, and we record how they improvise their
mm,
roles and then make a decision at the end of that period of time, or fail to make a decision at the end of that time. And that was such a relax. I feel so much more kind of invigorated. A, I love writing these things. B, watching people actually trying to solve problems that they would never be faced with in real life. Like, for example, one
yeah,
of the ones was you're watching a planet about to do basically mutually assured destruction.
mm,
Do you intervene? Do you not? And I've come up with all sorts of reasons, rationales, of why each person has their particular kind of stance, and then you sit back and watch
mm,
the chemistry of people
yeah,
discussing what they do about it, and
yeah.
it's enchanting. But that leads me on to, see, I wasn't just doing that as a segue. That leads me on to moving on from like board games and physical games, and we're talking about video games, but actually the observation of people playing
Yeah,
also adds a different effect to the social design, I would argue.
it
What do
does.
you think?
Yeah. And one of the things that I have found interestingly, I was not looking for it, but it happened when I was interviewing the different people, and I asked them what's their basically I ask all of them something along the lines of what's your social experience with games, um and they always almost always start with, well, when I was a kid, I watched my cousin play, I watched my brother play, and that was my experience as well. Or like, oh, we waited at the arcade to, like you were saying earlier. Or well, my cousin, one of the interviewers says that, oh, my cousin used to play these games, and all of the games when he finished them, he would give them to me, and we wouldn't really have a lot of other interactions because he was much older than me, but I got to play his games, like all of the
Mm.
ones, and that established a connection as well. So I think there's a lot more to the social experience of games than just like playing them at the same time,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
even watching can be with a great number of reasonings behind it, right?
mm,
It can be that you're showing someone something, or like you're trying to get them to like something that you like, or you're trying to help them out because maybe they can't quite do it. So like
mm,
when you play with your younger like relatives, that's the kind of thing. Or you're trying to watch because you're trying to tell if you're going to like playing it,
yeah.
or any number of things.
And also, I think there's something about watching which is, it's a bit like, yeah, yeah, we can watch TV and we can root for a character, but it's something different when it's a person.
Mm,
It's a bit, it's very much like watching sports, but it becomes more personal.
it does.
One of the, the fascinating thing is, my first ever experience joining the games industry was an event called Quakadelica that James Kay runs, Big Idea Machine, set up. So I came in as the new boss,
Mm,
but James did all the work. And watching, we had there was I think a page three model. I think she was called Joe Guest, who was doing the commentary with an
mm,
actual sports commentator. I think it was a sports commentator. I can't really remember the details of it, but this sort of celebrity type person,
mm,
this game commentator, showing how the competition was going on between the different players,
mm,
and on top of that, we brought in Thresh. So Thresh, whose his real name escapes me. I was talking about him earlier. He was at Gamescom. I didn't actually manage to catch up with him, but so this Thresh guy beat John Carmack at Quake, so he won his Ferrari. So James has flown this guy over. His loveliest guy. His girlfriend was the cutest, like the cutest couple you can imagine, and very unassuming. He gets on stage with the guy that's just won the UK tournament and demolishes him. Absolutely, yeah. So Thresh just does. I think he won at 56 to -1.
wow.
So you imagine this. We're watching this. We're watching this guy we've just seen win the UK tournament, the first Quake tournament, in a boxing ring with big screens on it. This is way before YouTube was a thing, but we got that visceral sense of commentary going on, excitement, talking. This is what's going on. We're watching the action. We're seeing the players. That was the first real taste I had of what
Mm,
esports could become, and I felt like I was part of it. I was kind of rooting for the UK guy, but I was just admiring the sheer skill of Thresh. And that to me is, so I think, so sums up every kind of experience where I've really resonated with watching an esports tournament, or where I'm, seeing friends playing other friends. This
mm,
sense of being able to admire those moments at school, recognizing those moments at school, they're going in the back of my mind because I'm going to try that next time I play. So I
mm.
think there's layers of experience that happen. It's very different from maybe other media.
There are, yeah, and I think you can see it how it's evolved as well, because in the past, you know, it's almost like you become friends with the person you're watching on
Mm.
Twitch, or like there's this commentary going on, and there's kind of two layers of social interactions. There's the like kind of parasocial relationship that you're having with this person that you don't actually know, that
Yeah.
they're sort of presenting themselves and in a way monetizing themselves as this
Mm,
character. But you
yeah.
also have the interaction, the social interaction with the community, and
Yeah.
it is actually very similar to being in the tribune at like a football match, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you
Completely.
go there because you go to see the football, right? But you go there because you're in with everyone else and you can feel the excitement of everyone else, and
Yeah. Absolutely.
that is part of the experience. That is the social part of it, and this is why people love going, right?
Mm,
And it's the
completely.
same with this. It just takes a different form, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked for about 40, 50 minutes, about 50 minutes, but we haven't really kind of dived into some specific kind of actionable things. I mean,
Mm.
I'm just looking at your chapter 7 and the hypersocial audience and masters of online non-verbal. I would let's do another talk. Let's go into that another time.
Yes.
So, for someone who's listening to this, who's heard us talk about the importance of social and kind of sort of the levers of social,
Mm.
what are the things that you think mechanically that they should start with? Where are the bits that you think kind of if somebody is new to thinking about how so, or maybe hasn't really thought about how their mechanics work socially, what are things that you would recommend that they think about?
So I think there is quite a lot to do with, well, the social mechanics that people use should be very well understood, and
Hmm.
I don't think there's any point in going over those. But I think all of those
Well, but
methods,
like what? What do you
um,
mean by
so
well
I mean,
understood?
like, how do you do a good guild, right? How do you
Sure,
have a
fine.
guild
Have a
mechanic?
guild,
How do
fine.
you have a share mechanic? That
Yeah,
those are the basics.
but
Once you've
they're the
learned
bits and bolts, aren't they? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So beyond that, I think the thing that, well, the lesson that I would say is that always make the decision that makes the group happy, not the individual happy.
yeah,
Because I've come in my experience and in my career, I have come upon a lot of situation in which the good design decision would have been a different one from the one that I have taken,
yeah,
because I was thinking of the group and I wasn't
absolutely.
thinking of the player as an individual. And sometimes this is the thing, this is the trade-off. There is never going to be a game that is as good play alone as it is played with a group. I've tried, that just is not going to happen. So when it
Well, I don't know.
comes to making
I'm quite
decisions,
a I'm one of these quite antisocial players. So I like massively single player games.
yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. It's like you're never going to be able to make everyone like your game. You have to
No,
understand the purpose of it, and the purpose being social. You have to make the decisions from a social perspective, even if
mm.
that means that it you don't want it to ruin the single player,
No, no, no,
but
absolutely not.
you want it to be like,
Mm.
if a decision comes up and you have to make it, then you should always lean towards the social decision.
And I have a kind of I think this should be deeply embedded in every decision you make about the system. So, for example,
Yeah.
one of the things I try to get people to think about is like how your different kind of play what players value. So things
Mm,
like shortcuts and social goods. So like your cosmetics, things like I call them subsistence goods. So basically things that you have to keep playing, like health
mm,
potions or fuel or things like that. But I think of strategy goods in this way. So
mm,
first thing, I want them to have like non-linear, so scissor paper stone type. So fire sword, water shield. So it's not just a +1 all the time, because I think +1 is boring and you end up not. Who cares?
yeah.
But I think the other thing that's really important is that by me buying a strategy good, a new game mode, a new functional thing,
Mm,
it should make everybody else's game more interesting. And I think, but to your point about what's good for the group, I think it's really matters. So if I buy something and it makes me better than you, you've broken the game for those other players. You made them feel like it's pay to win. Even if it's not strictly pay to win,
mm,
you've basically broken the trust. You've broken the social contract, arguably. Whereas if I buy something which puts me in a position which makes, so rather than you having to just avoid a sword, the fact that I'm using a fire sword changes how you have to then respond to that. It
yeah.
adds flavor to the game experience.
Mm.
So the argument I use is scissor paper stone lizard Spock. So You've got scissor paper stone. I've bought the upgrade lizard Spock.
Yeah.
So now there's some maths issues with this, but in general, you now have two more choices you've got to respond to.
Mm.
I've got two more choices I can use, but in theory, although not quite true in the maths, uh, there's no difference in the chances. You can still
Mm.
respond to everything. There happens to be a dominant strategy, but even then, even if you take the actual maths of it, even though there's a dominant strategy, you can still play with it. It's still
Yeah.
making the decisions we make that both sides have to make
Mm.
now become deeper, more interesting, resonant
Yeah.
questions. If that makes sense.
It does. I think one of the things that I would add to that as well is that you should give people the choice to be interacting with their friends the way that they want to be interacting with their
Yes,
friends. Because
absolutely.
I have many times, and this is a big mistake that I think a lot of multiplayer games do, is that you punish people for not having time. So if my friends have more free time and they have the chance to level up, you level my friends up away from me, and then when I try to play with them, even if we can match make together, we then end up against people who are their level, not mine,
Yeah,
and then I just get frustrated and I'm not going to be able to play with my friends. I think in principle there's a lot of these things when you're like, this is basic level like game design decision, and then if you think about the group, that's what I mean. Like, something might feel like a standard decision to make, but if you
yeah.
consider the wider group, you're like, oh, that's not that's not
No,
that good,
exactly.
is it?
No, and honestly, I think this is one of the issues I have. It's why I go back to that weapon of choice example, is because you've you've got inherent design in the normal way we do things, where
Mm,
the winner is the one that gets all the best stuff. Whereas
yeah,
that means that they're going to be further and further away. They're going to be harder and harder to catch up with over
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So you've not only got the complication of somebody with natural skill already overpowering other players, but somebody with deep pockets or deep time will
yeah.
overpower other people. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we're going to make sure we manage that. But I don't think there is an ideal world. You're always going to end up with this differentiation unless you directly address it.
Yeah, I think so. I think making the choice, that's the thing. Maybe making the social choices, sometimes
Mm.
making a decision away from traditional game design
Mm.
thinking, um is what I would probably say.
And I go back to, why don't you reward people for taking a handicap, making their difficulty more difficult, but they get more points for doing it, or they get some more something, they get special,
Yeah,
you get some different kind of like prestige. And prestige is a classic example where it's free.
yeah.
It's just about recognizing people's choices.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we in one of the games that we made, we added a player level, and it wasn't doing anything. It was just
Mm.
like you would play and you would have a player level, and that was it. And people kept messaging us to add more levels onto the player level because they have reached the cap, and we
Yeah,
just kept telling them it doesn't do anything, and they're like,
yeah,
oh, I want to be like level 100 or whatever.
yeah.
Like,
No, no. But I mean, again, similarly, there's a whole kind of again, we could have a whole podcast on the the tyranny of numbers, the tyranny of averages, and you also go into the ethical aspects of social game design in the book.
yeah,
And honestly, let's we always say this every time we chat. We want to have more chats, so let's do more chats.
sure,
And
I'm happy.
so I'm gonna wrap up, and I'm gonna ask you to sort of give the one thing you think you should take away from this chat. But just to remind people out there that the book is called Designing Games Meant for Sharing. It's from
Indeed.
CRC Press.
Yes, this one.
It's it's very good. Go check it out. You might want to get your boss, if you're in a game team, to pay for it. But thoroughly recommend that. But honestly, fantastic subject, well explored, and I'm going to go and complete reading it. I haven't finished reading it yet because I'm terrible. Anyway, Iona, tell us, what do you think is the one thing people should take away from this topic?
I think the one thing that I would say people should take away from this topic is that when we are working with people, the people and their connection is the most important thing. And that we should always prioritize that connection in every single way that we can. And ignoring it is not going to make it any better. So we have to be, well, I mean, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that it is there, because I think when you explore, it's such a big opportunity. When you explore it, it transforms into this really rich, really good thing. And you can see it with the games that have done it successfully recently, that they have done so well because they
Yeah,
have explored that possibility.
yeah.
So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
I'm kind of with you. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we ignore the social value at our peril. And when you look at the market right now, in terms of particularly free to play games, so much of it is embedded
Mm,
in vanity items. And as one of the speakers at the Live Game Summit yesterday said, oh, was it yesterday, the day before? Anyway, at the time of recording, of course, they said basically, the thing about this is, if you've got a vanity product and you haven't got a vanity experience, you're
yeah,
not going to sell any.
no,
And again, this is not to reduce it to money. It's just that that's a way where we can measure absolutely. If you haven't covered this stuff off, you haven't got the audience.
yeah,
Massive lost opportunity. Again, it's what builds retention. We stay because we want to play with our friends.
yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for that. Oh, where can people find you if they want to follow up more?
Oh, that's a very good
Yeah,
question. I have kind of killed my Twitter
you've
because
killed because of yes. I haven't quite killed it, but I have. I'm definitely not as engaged as I once was. Yeah.
yeah, I can be reached out at on my LinkedIn if people would like, at Ioana Julia Kazaku. That's just my name. You can reach out for me.
And we'll make sure it's all spelt out properly. Don't worry.
Wonderful. I
Yeah.
also have a website that I can share with you the link if people would like to look at it.
Fantastic. And of course, you can always go and look on Amazon, and the book is available there.
Indeed.
I've been Oscar. I am at Athanasius. Yes, that is a hard one. We'll make sure that's written down properly. It's an old role playing game character. Yes, I know. But I'm there everywhere. But I'm also Googleable, so that's fine. And if you're interested in this real play game podcast we're making, that's called Anything Could Happen, or ACH Dilemma Game at various places. So, on that note, this has been your Game Dev London podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe, do all of the things that you do, but also comment. Tell us about what you think. If you got a different view on what social mechanics are, if you got a favorite social mechanic, let us know. And obviously, we want to carry on having conversations like this. And if you come back and tell us what you enjoy about it, it's going to make it much easier for us to make sure we get the material that you want to hear. And don't forget, there's also the Discord. So the Game Dev Local Discord is also available. Come and join us. Come and talk about game dev. If you love making games, we are a community that love that too. On that note, thank you very much all, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.